I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. There were times when I would have someone to hang out with for a short period of time, but those friendships rarely ever lasted very long. More often than not, I always just ended up being alone. I didn't mind being alone, really. It was nice to have some time to myself to think, and I did that quite a lot. I used to go on really long walks simply to have some time to myself. While I didn't have very many long-term friends, I did know a couple of bullies. The absolute worst bully I ever knew was this guy named Billy. He was just one of those childhood and eventually teenage thugs that you just knew was gonna end up in prison someday. He was always out getting into fights. He was always getting suspended from school, and before he was even 16 years old, he was expelled. This story, however, takes place before then. I was 13 years old at the time, and I think Billy was 15. It happened on Halloween night of that year. Now, I had trick-or-treated the year before. I probably would have done so at 13 if I had some friends to go with me, but I was feeling a bit weird about the whole idea. Still, I loved the whole atmosphere of trick-or-treating. I liked seeing all of the people out there and just enjoying Halloween. So although I didn't dress up and go to house asking for candy, I did go out for a long walk in the neighborhood. In our neighborhood, tons and tons of children would be out trick-or-treating. People went all out in decorating their houses as well. Individual yards turned into these elaborate haunted houses, and parents dressed up to try and scare trick-or-treaters as they walked by. This is why I was just not able to stay home on Halloween night. It was just way too fun. So I walked through the neighborhood back and forth a few times. Seeing everyone just having so much fun sort of did get me down after a while. It made me feel that maybe it would have been okay one more time to go trick-or-treating, but of course by that point it was too late for me to change my mind. As the trick-or-treating started to wind down, I was feeling even more down than I had before, so I decided I would just keep walking. I walked out of the neighborhood and even walked out of town. I hadn't brought a watch with me, so I was never sure exactly how long I had been out, or what time it actually was. When you're depressed and just aimlessly walking around, you can lose track of the time pretty quickly. At one point, I came across the cemetery that was out of town. Feeling that my Halloween had maybe been a bit disappointing, I decided maybe a trip through the cemetery might cheer me up a bit. At least I could still end my Halloween with a bit of a spooky time. Have you ever been walking and you come along a stray dog or a stray cat? A lot of times you do that and the animal just kind of follows you around. It's usually a pretty nice thing to have happen. As I walked into the cemetery, a really big Rottweiler came trotting up toward me. At first, I froze out of fear. I mean, those dogs are huge, and I had no idea what to expect from it. I was pleasantly surprised, though, when the dog came right up to me and nuzzled my hand affectionately. I tried to be brave and pat the dog on my head. He was very responsive, so I tried scratching his ears as well. Turned out he liked that too, so I decided that I had finally come across a friendly companion for my walk through the cemetery. I have to admit also that I was a bit happier to have the dog with me for my walk. Cemeteries are always pretty scary no matter what. The dog trotted right beside me as I walked into the graveyard. Even with him there, I have to admit to being a bit unnerved. That's what I was looking for, though. It was quiet in the cemetery, and the small breezes of wind making the trees rustle was a bit eerie. However, I was only slightly on nerve about being there. The dog stayed with me throughout the entire walk through the cemetery, but when I got to the other side, to the exit, he only followed me for a short period of time afterward. The dog sat down on the ground and looked at me. I stopped and gave his ears another scratch. I thanked him for coming along with me, and then he turned and ran back toward the cemetery. I have to admit I was disappointed at losing my companion, but I was happy for this rare experience. I had started thinking that maybe he wasn't a stray. Maybe he was a guard dog that belonged to the caretaker of the cemetery. If so, he was the nicest one I had ever come across. One of the things I didn't like about Halloween was that it often fell on a weekday, so I had school the very next day. I had been out really late the previous night, so I was sort of sleepwalking through the day. During lunchtime, I was eating alone, and that was when someone came and seated themselves across from me at the table. I was shocked to see that it was Billy. I was scared but also surprised. He wasn't the kind of guy to bully someone blatantly in the lunchroom, where he could easily be caught. "Enjoy your little walk through the graveyard?" he asked me. "You're so chicken shit you had to take your dog with you, huh? You can't have him with you all the time." With that, Billy got up and left. I was stunned. It took me a while to try and put two and two together. Once I did, I realized that he and his buddies must have been hanging out in the cemetery and seen me walking through the previous night. As his comments sunk in further, I realized that the only reason this sociopath hadn't attacked me was because that huge Rottweiler had followed me through the graveyard. I don't really know what to think about that. Did the graveyard just have a guard dog? I had no way of knowing, and I was not going to go there or call and ask. Was it a stray dog that just coincidentally came up on me? I have no idea, but knowing how crazy and mean Billy was, if he had attacked me alone that night, who knows what may have happened to me. It certainly wouldn't have been good. Since it is the season now, I thought I would share a scary experience that happened to me once on Halloween. It was a normal Halloween for the most part. I was a teenager at the time. I was too old to do things like trick-or-treat anymore, but I did go over to my best friend's house in order to watch some scary movies. This was in the late 1980s, so we didn't have access to as much horror content as you can get on the internet nowadays. All we really had was a VCR, and my family didn't actually own one. My friend Alan's family did though, so whenever they would make a trip to the video store, especially on Halloween, I would go over there and we would just have a marathon of scary movies. Alan didn't live very close to me at all. My parents had to drive me over to his house. After watching the movies, I would normally spend the night. This was because by the time we were done watching, my parents would have already gone to bed. Then, my parents would come and get me sometime the following day, but there had been a few occasions when I would have walked back to my house from Alan's. We'd had a pretty good night watching movies that night. I can still remember a few of them that we watched. Carrie, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and Prom Night. We started watching early, so we usually got through about 5 movies. I don't remember what the others were though. Anyway, it was well past midnight by the time we were done watching, and like normal, Alan had fallen asleep before we were done. I got through them all though. I went to get ready for bed, and that was when I realized that I had forgotten to bring something with me that I absolutely needed if I was going to get any sleep. I always slept with earplugs in my ears because the slightest sound would wake me right up. This might not seem like a big deal to most people, but it was a huge one to me. Alan was one of those deep sleepers and he wouldn't be up for like 8 hours. I wasn't prepared to not be able to sleep that long. I decided I would just go ahead and head on home. It would take me about an hour to make the walk, but it would be well worth it when I would actually be able to sleep. I decided I would just go ahead and do just that. I left Alan a note. He knew that I had to have earplugs to sleep, so he wouldn't be too upset at me for leaving. Alan lived in the town next over from mine. Both of those towns went to the same school system, which is how the two of us became friends in the first place. In order to get from one town to the next, I would have to walk out of town and along this road by this forest on both sides. It was dark and very creepy, and I was not looking forward to doing it. I almost actually changed my mind. When I got to the forested part of the road, I could feel my heartbeat starting to go much faster. I just had to remind myself that I had done this several times before, and there was nothing to be scared of. I would very soon be at home and safely into bed. Walking through that area, it was so dark. I mean, I could see a little bit, but not very much at all. I had a light on my watch, but it was one of those LCD lights in a digital watch, and at the time they barely even let you see the numbers, much less using it as a flashlight. Eventually though, something caught my eye off to the right of me. Peering into the forest, I noticed what looked like some very faint lights. They were a bit away from me, but watching them, I could see them coming ever closer. They kept getting closer and closer as I watched, and eventually I was able to make out that there were 3 of them. They were moving in my direction, really slowly. I have to admit, in believing in things like ghosts and UFOs and things like that, so seeing the 3 lights moving toward me from a forest in the pitch black in the middle of the night, I immediately lost my nerve. I began running as fast as I could. I ran and ran until I got all the way to the end of the forested part of the road, and then some. Finally, I looked back and I didn't see anything behind me. I turned and went back to walking home. I was walking a bit faster than I had before I noticed the lights though. I didn't quit doing so until I finally got home. It was several days later when I heard the news that scared the hell out of me. The dead body of a young man in his early 20s had been found buried in a shallow grave. That grave was in the woods, just along that road I had been walking on that night. It was in the middle of the forest. Later that day, 3 men were arrested on suspicion of murder. One of them cracked during questioning and confessed to everything. I have absolutely no way of knowing if those 3 lights that I had seen were the flashlights of those 3 men making their way out of the forest after burying the man they had just killed. But the timing seems perfect, doesn't it? The murder happened on Halloween that day, and the body was found in that area. Whether or not it was them is something I can never know, but I'll always believe myself that it was. I ran away because I thought the lights I was seeing were ghosts. Honestly, if I thought that they were 3 men with flashlights, I probably wouldn't have done so. I wouldn't have ever thought that was something to be scared of, so if it was them, maybe my believing in ghosts saved me from having a similar ending to that man. Okay, so I've told this story before, and people have had their doubts about it that time as well. I always take the story with a grain of salt. That doesn't mean I want you to doubt that the story actually happened. It definitely did. But since it happened on Halloween, it's quite possible it may have just been a scary prank. I really can't tell whether or not it was a prank or if it was serious. In the town I grew up in, we have a pretty big graveyard. And of course, when Halloween comes around, it turns into the center of teenage activity in the town. Groups of teenagers can always be found in different parts of the graveyard, drinking, smoking weed, sometimes having sex. Although honestly, the very idea of doing that in a graveyard is very confusing to me. I struggle to think how anyone could find that arousing. Me and my 2 best friends were not too keen on hanging out in the graveyard as a result. We couldn't hang out at any of our homes though. Whenever we wanted to drink or smoke weed, we could never do it at home. There was always someone there who would catch us immediately if we did. We really didn't want to go to the graveyard. There were too many people who would be there, albeit in small and spread out groups, and since the graveyard had a reputation, it was much more likely a place for the police to come if they were going to try and bust some kids. Instead, whenever we smoked pot, we would go to this bridge that was out of town. It was a bridge that had been built for a train, so we never had to worry about cars driving by and catching us. Freight train operators wouldn't notice, and they wouldn't care if they did. Wouldn't be able to stop to do anything about it either. So we waited until the sun went down, of course, but it really didn't matter. We made our way over to the railroad track and followed it. We had been out to the bridge so often that even in the dark, it wasn't difficult for us to know where we were going. We followed the railroad tracks right out of town and into the more rural area surrounding it. We eventually came to the creek that the bridge spanned. Once we got there, we had to climb down to get under it. There was some concrete that was obviously used in the support of the bridge that we always sat down on while we smoked weed. We knew we hadn't been the first teenagers in history to have discovered that spot under the bridge. The walls of the small tunnel had graffiti on it that indicated others had known about it long before we had. Up until then, though, we had never run into anyone else there. As usual, there was no one there that time either. We sat down and prepared to have a good time together. We were down there for quite a while having a pretty good Halloween. "Hey, what the hell is that?" one of my friends asked out of nowhere. Looking to where he was pointing, we noticed something off in the distance. Someone was walking along the creek that the bridge was built over. "Just some guy," I recall responding to my friend. Although we had never before encountered anyone walking along the creek, we kept watching as he got closer and closer, and when he ceased being a shadow in the distance, we were finally able to see what was coming toward us. "I don't freaking believe this," I said. "It was a clown." Now, I didn't want to mention when this story happened before I began telling it. That's because it happened in 2016, when that whole weird clown sighting thing was still going on. I didn't want it to seem obvious right away that's what the story was going to be about. All three of us watched scary stuff on YouTube, so by the time we were all very familiar with the clown thing happening. This was in the middle of the height of when that was going on. We had seen videos of ones that were obviously set up by the people involved. But this was real because we didn't take a video of it, and we hadn't set anything up to scare ourselves either. A lot of these sightings were in areas like the one we were in. Unlike many people who spotted clowns, we were not curious enough to spend much time trying to figure out what was going on. If it had been anything except a clown, we would have chalked it up to a Halloween stunt, but we were not willing to risk it. The three of us climbed up back onto the railroad tracks, and we started hustling along them. We looked back after a while, and were able to see that the figure had moved up from the creek to the tracks, but he was moving very slowly. It didn't seem like he was trying to catch us. We had no doubt he was trying to scare us, though. I wish we had been able to record this. At the time, everyone had a video of their scary clown encounter, and ours was just a story. No one would ever just read a story, right? What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I hope you guys are enjoying this sort of daily upload thing. I'm trying to upload as much as possible while I still have the time to, mostly because I find it fun and there's not much else to do while COVID is around, so I hope you guys are enjoying that. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. These stories were all submitted to me through my email by subscribers. If you guys would also like to submit stories for me to read in the video, please be sure to take a look in the description below. It will have links to all my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. You can go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to your story as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, so I can make it a nice, healthy, long video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, the theme of the story if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, make sure you use proper grammar and spatial paragraphs and all that stuff, because it's kind of hard to read wall of text submissions. If you guys are new to the channel and you like this, I have two other channels, one where I do disaster documentaries, and another one where I do true crime videos. I do both of those once a week. You'll find links to those in the description as well. Those are called Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour, respectively. Special thanks to my artist. His links to his social media will be in the description below. He does all of my artwork for this channel, and he does the thumbnails as well. If you like his art, so you can check his social media out, and he'll be able to get you something real cool if you're in the mood for that. If you guys are curious about the music, it's listed in the description below in the order which it appears with links to the artists. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.